The envelope sat on Clara's kitchen table like a guillotine, its red HOA seal glaring under the morning light. A $5,000 fine for her unsightly garden, it declared, with threats of liens and legal action if she didn't rip out every wildflower and vine by week's end. Clara's hands trembled as she read the letter again, her heart pounding with a mix of fury and dread. That garden wasn't just plants, it was her sanctuary, her rebellion against the sterile conformity of willow. Creeks, manicured lawns. She'd spent years cultivating its chaotic beauty, each bloom a memory of her late mother, who'd taught her to love the untamed. The HOA wanted it gone, and Clara had one day to fight back before they bulldozed her legacy. But as she stared at the riot of colors outside her window, a stranger's car pulled into her driveway, and a single phone call changed everything. Clara's garden was a living tapestry, sprawling across her modest front yard in a defiant explosion of color. Sunflowers towered over tangles of lavender and black-eyed Susans, while honeysuckle climbed the fence in fragrant defiance. It was the only yard in Willow Creek that didn't bow to the HOA's obsession with uniformity, perfectly trimmed hedges, identical green lawns, and soulless gravel paths. To Clara, the garden was more than beauty. It was her mother's voice, whispering through the petals, a reminder of the woman who'd raised her to cherish what grew free. Her mother had died 3 years ago, and the garden had become Clara's way of keeping her close. The HOA's fine felt like a personal attack, a blade aimed at her heart. She stood at her window, gripping the fine notice, her knuckles white. The letter cited violations of community aesthetic standards and demanded immediate compliance. Clara's neighbors had complained, it said, calling her garden an eyesore that lowered property values. She could still hear Mrs. Hargrove from next door, sniffing disdainfully at the weeds during last month's HOA meeting. Clara had wanted to scream then, to tell them every plant had a purpose, a story. Instead, she'd stayed silent, and now her silence had cost her. The doorbell rang, sharp and insistent. Clara froze, her pulse spiking. Was it the HOA already? Come to inspect? She smoothed her hair, took a deep breath, and opened the door. A man in a tweed jacket stood there, his glasses slightly askew, a clipboard clutched in his hands. He looked out of place in Willow Creek's cookie-cutter perfection, like he'd wandered in from another era. "Ms. Clara Nguyen?" he asked, his voice warm but urgent. "I'm Daniel Pierce, with the city's Historical Preservation Office. May I come in? It's about your garden." Clara's stomach twisted. Historical preservation? She stepped aside, letting him in, her mind racing. Was this another bureaucrat here to scold her? Daniel glanced at the fine notice on the table and frowned, setting his clipboard down. "I'll cut to the chase," he said, his eyes bright with something Clara couldn't play. "It's excitement, maybe? Your garden isn't just a garden. A living archive, a remnant of the Whitaker Estate's original botanical collection. We believe it's eligible for landmark status. If we're right, it's worth $500,000. Clara stared, her breath catching. $500,000. What? My garden? Her voice cracked, disbelief warring with hope. The Whitaker Estate was a legend in Willow Creek, a 19th-century manor long since demolished to make way for the subdivision. She'd heard rumors of its gardens, but they were just stories, weren't they? Daniel nodded, pulling a folder from his bag. The estate's owner, Eliza Whitaker, was a botanist who cultivated rare native species. Most of her collection was destroyed when the land was developed, but your property, it's a miracle. Some of those plants match her records. If we can prove it, the city will protect it as a historic landmark. Clara's head spun. A landmark? Her mother had started the garden decades ago, using seeds and cuttings from her own childhood home. Could they really be that old? That rare? She sank into a chair, her hands shaking. "But the HOA," she said, gesturing to the fine notice. "They're coming tomorrow. They'll tear it all out." Daniel's face darkened. "Not if I can help it. We need to act fast. The city's review board meets tomorrow afternoon. If we can get your garden on their agenda, they can issue a temporary protection order. But we'll need evidence photos, soil samples, plant inventories, and we need to move now." The urgency in his voice lit a fire in Clara. She wasn't going to lose her garden, not to the HOA's petty tyranny. Notebook following Daniel outside. The morning sun bathed the garden in golden light, each bloom glowing with defiance. They worked quickly, Daniel identifying plants while Clara snapped photos and jotted down names. Carolina lupin, purple. Coneflower, butterfly, milkweed. Each one was a piece of history, a thread connecting her to her mother and to a past she hadn't known existed. As they worked, the car slowed on the street, its tinted windows hiding the driver. Clara's skin prickled. It was Mr. Ellison, the HOA president, his sleek SUV a familiar menace. He'd been the loudest voice against her garden, his complaints dripping with condescension. The car lingered, then sped off, leaving Clara's heart pounding. "He's watching," she muttered. Daniel glanced up, his jaw tight. "He's not the only one. It's the developer who built Willow Creek, Paragon Realty, has ties to the HOA. They don't like surprises, especially ones that could lock up a valuable lot. If your garden gets landmark status, they can't touch it or redevelop it." Clara's stomach dropped. Redevelop? Her house was small, old, the last original structure on the block. She'd always known Paragon wanted her land. Her refusal to sell had earned her years of harassment. The fine wasn't just about aesthetics. It was a power play. "You're trying to force me out," she said, her voice low. Daniel nodded. "Which is why we can't stop. Let's finish this inventory and get it to the city by noon." They worked through the morning, the air growing heavy with the threat of rain. Clara's hands were stained with soil, her clothes damp with sweat, but she felt alive, purposeful. Each plant she documented was a small act of resistance, a middle finger to Ellison and his HOA cronies. By noon they had a dossier, photos, notes, and a soil sample Daniel swore would match the Whitaker estate's records. But as they loaded the materials into Daniel's car, a truck roared into the cul-de-sac. Clara's heart sank. It was the HOA's landscaping crew, their trailer loaded with bulldozers and chainsaws. Ellison stepped out, his suit pristine despite the gathering clouds. "Ms. Nguyen," he called, his voice dripping with false politeness. "I see you're ignoring our notice. That's unfortunate." Clara's fists clenched. "You can't touch my garden. It's under review for landmark status." Ellison's smile didn't falter, but his eyes narrowed. "Landmark? It's a stretch. This is private property, and the HOA has jurisdiction. Step aside, or we'll call the sheriff." Daniel stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "The city's historical preservation office disagrees. We've submitted evidence to the review board. Any action you take now could be illegal." Ellison's smile vanished. "You're bluffing." But he hesitated, glancing at the crew. Clara saw her chance. "It's not a bluff," she said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. "The city's coming tomorrow. You destroy this garden, you'll be answering to them and the press." The standoff stretched, the air thick with tension. Rain began to fall, soft at first, then harder, soaking Clara's clothes. Ellison's gaze flicked to the garden, then back to her. "You're making a mistake," he said finally, signaling the crew to leave. The truck rumbled away, but Clara knew it wasn't over. That night, she couldn't sleep. Rain battered the windows, and every creak of the house made her jump. She kept the dossier by her bed, her mother's old gardening journal tucked beside it. Around midnight, her phone buzzed a text from an unknown number. "Back off, or you'll regret it, Clarice." Blood ran cold. She forwarded it to Daniel, who promised to alert the city. The next morning, Clara and Daniel stood before the city's review board, a panel of stern-faced officials in a sterile conference room. Clara's hands shook as she presented the dossier, her voice steady, but her heart racing. The board listened, their expressions unreadable. Outside, Ellison and a Paragon Realty lawyer waited, their presence a silent threat, as the board deliberated. Clara's phone buzzed again, another anonymous text. "Last warning." She showed it to Daniel, who whispered, "They're desperate. That means we're close." Hours later, the board's chairwoman emerged. "Hey, Ms. Nguyen," she said, her voice carrying across the room. Your garden has been granted temporary landmark status, pending further review. Its estimated value, based on its historical significance, is $500,000. The city will issue a protection order effective immediately. Clara's knees buckled, relief flooding her. Daniel grabbed her arm, grinning. Outside, Ellison's face was a mask of fury, but he said nothing as he stormed off. The garden was safe for now. That evening, Clara stood in her yard. Rain sowstring. The garden glowed under the setting sun, its wild beauty untouched. She thought of her mother, of the seeds she'd planted long ago, and tears stung her eyes. The fight wasn't over. Paragon wouldn't give up easily, but for the first time in years, Clara felt unbreakable. Her garden, her mother's legacy, was a fortress, and she'd defend it to her last breath.